A teenage girl in handcuffs, dragged through a McDonald's in front of stunned onlookers. Her crime? Daring to order food after 5 o'clock. The image has torn Britain apart, igniting fury across the nation. But what sent shockwaves even further was not just the arrest itself, it was the voice that rose against it. Ricky Gervais, the comedian who built his career mocking hypocrisy and exposing lies with sharp humour, erupted in rage. His words cut deeper than any politician's speech, because unlike Starmer's scripted lines, Gervais spoke with raw disgust, unfiltered and straight to the point. He asked what millions were already whispering. How did Britain fall so far that violent gangs roam free while a child is shackled over a burger? In that single question, Gervais dragged Keir Starmer into the harshest spotlight of his career, forcing the public to look at the grotesque double standards now embedded in Britain's so-called justice system. When Ricky Gervais spoke out, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't comedy, it was rage. A man who had spent years ridiculing the nonsense of society now found himself staring at something that wasn't just absurd, it was sinister. Imagine arresting a teenage girl for eating McDonald's, he said, his voice trembling with disbelief. This isn't satire. This isn't parody. This is real. A child handcuffed while criminals with knives, machetes and worse are left alone. What kind of twisted country is this becoming? That fury tapped into a vein of public anger that was already boiling. For months, people had seen Starmer's government talk tough on crime, promising safer streets and tougher policing. But what they got was a grotesque performance. Whole squads of officers turning up to manhandle a schoolgirl in broad daylight, while grooming gangs and predators were allowed to continue unchecked. Gervais exposed the heart of the matter. Starmer's Britain was not about protecting the innocent, but controlling them. The arrest itself became a symbol, an image that could not be spun away with press releases or clever sound bites. A girl with no history of violence, no record of crime, treated like a hardened criminal simply for eating food at the wrong hour. The absurdity was so blatant that even comedians, men and women who make their living exaggerating reality, could no longer laugh. I can't even make a joke about it, Gervais admitted, because the joke is already written by the government. They've made reality more ridiculous than anything I could come up with. The public reaction was immediate. Parents raged at the thought of their own children being next. Teenagers flooded social media, sharing videos and memes, mocking the absurdity, but also shaking with fear. If a 15-year-old could be dragged away from a fast food counter, who could feel safe anymore? But while ordinary families were left to question their place in this system, the Prime Minister remained silent. Starmer had no words, no explanation, nothing but cold silence. It was that silence that set Gervais off. He saw through it instantly. A real leader would come out and face it, he spat. Stand there, take responsibility, admit the system failed. But instead, he hides. He waits for the headlines to fade. That's not leadership, that's cowardice. Gervais's words weren't just an opinion. They were a dagger aimed directly at the hollow shell of Starmer's promises. Because what is a leader worth if he cannot face the very people he governs? As the outrage deepened, a disturbing pattern came into focus. This was not just one mistake. This was not one overzealous police squad. This was the natural result of policies designed to criminalise the ordinary while shielding the dangerous. Under Starmer's vision, the people easiest to control, the children, the elderly, the law-abiding, became the easiest targets. Meanwhile, entire districts plagued by gangs were avoided, left to rot, because tackling them would mean real confrontation, real risk, and real accountability. Arresting a schoolgirl in McDonald's was safe, easy, a performance of law and order without the substance. And Gervais wasn't alone in saying it. His fury echoed what millions were feeling, but too afraid to voice. Britain had slipped into a two-tier justice system, and this arrest was the smoking gun. Ordinary citizens were punished for the smallest misstep, while others, often shielded by politics or by fear of backlash, were left untouched. The more people looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't law and order. This was selective justice, a government deciding who gets crushed and who gets ignored. By the time the footage spread across the nation, Starmer's Britain was already in crisis. Protests erupted outside police stations. Parents demanded answers. Journalists, usually loyal to the Labour leadership, were forced to ask uncomfortable questions. And standing above it all was Ricky Gervais, a man who never wanted to be political, now being dragged into the arena because silence was no longer an option. His fury became the voice of Britain's outrage. His disbelief, the mirror reflecting the absurd nightmare unfolding under Starmer's rule. This was only the beginning. The arrest of a schoolgirl had unleashed something deeper, something Starmer's government could no longer control. Because once ordinary people saw the system for what it truly was, once they heard voices like Gervais refusing to be silenced, the question could no longer be avoided. If this is what justice looks like in Britain, how much longer can Britain endure it? The arrest of a schoolgirl should have been an isolated scandal, a single blunder, quickly corrected with an apology. But under Starmer, it became something far worse. It became policy in action. This wasn't about one girl, one burger, or one evening in McDonald's. It was a glimpse into the machine of control, now grinding away at the fabric of British society. And Ricky Gervais made it crystal clear, this wasn't law enforcement, this was theatre, a show designed to remind people who holds the power and who must bow their heads. As the footage spread, people asked the obvious question, why was an entire squad of police dispatched to grab a teenager, when whole neighbourhoods are ruled by machete gangs, grooming rings, and predators? Why are resources spent humiliating a child over fast food while violent criminals laugh in the shadows? The answer, as Gervais bluntly put it, was cowardice. The police know where the real danger is, he said, but they don't go there. Because it's messy, it's dangerous, and it might embarrass their bosses. So instead, they arrest kids. Safe, easy, no risk. It's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. That word, pathetic, stuck, because it summed up exactly how millions felt about Starmer's Britain. The government projected strength, yet the reality was weakness. They boasted of cracking down on crime, yet chose only the softest, most defenceless targets. A schoolgirl in handcuffs was not a sign of order. It was a sign of collapse. And the more people thought about it, the more they saw the pattern everywhere. Parents began coming forward with their own stories. Children disciplined at school for wearing the Union Jack. Students silenced for daring to question the new rules of diversity. Ordinary workers threatened with arrest for speaking too loudly about migration. All the while, reports grew of areas where police dared not enter, where gangs roamed free, where locals lived in fear but no patrols ever came. A two-tier system in plain sight, heavy-handed punishment for the ordinary, blind eyes turned toward the dangerous. Gervais seized on this hypocrisy with the sharpness of a scalpel. He mocked Starmer not with jokes, but with brutal honesty. If this was in one of my comedy scripts, he said, you'd throw it out. Too unrealistic, too stupid. Arresting a kid for a cheeseburger while murderers walk free? No audience would buy it. But this isn't a script. This is real, and it's terrifying. In those few sentences, he did what politicians feared most. He stripped away the spin, leaving the raw absurdity exposed. But Gervais wasn't laughing, and neither was the country. Anger boiled over in protests that spread beyond London. Outside McDonald's restaurants, parents stood with placards demanding answers. On social media, videos went viral of ordinary Britons daring police to arrest them too, daring them to prove the double standards. The sight of officers struggling to defend their actions only fueled the fury. Each new explanation sounded weaker than the last. It was procedure. It was necessary for safety. The people weren't buying it, because no one believed a schoolgirl in a burger shop posed any danger. And then came the silence from Starmer himself. Days passed before he even acknowledged the arrest. When he finally spoke, it was cold, mechanical, and full of the usual politician's tricks. He praised the dedication of the police. He called for respect for authority. But not once did he mention the girl's name. Not once did he admit the cruelty of treating a child like a criminal. That silence, those missing words, became the final straw. Gervais ripped into it without hesitation. You don't get to hide behind fancy speeches when a kid is dragged away in handcuffs, he said. You don't get to pretend it didn't happen. Leadership means facing it head on, not ducking behind platitudes, while a teenager's life is scarred forever. If you think this is acceptable, you don't deserve to lead. His rage echoed in every corner of the nation, because for once, it wasn't a politician talking down to the people. It was one of their own, furious on their behalf. The scandal had now grown into a symbol, one that reached far beyond McDonald's. It was no longer just about food, or curfews, or police overreach. It was about identity, freedom, and what it meant to be British in Starmer's Britain. Parents wondered if their children were next. Workers asked if their voices would be silenced tomorrow. Ordinary people felt a creeping truth settle in their bones. They were living under a government more interested in punishing the harmless than protecting the vulnerable. And Ricky Gervais, the comedian turned reluctant truth-teller, was the one who forced that truth into the open. His fury cracked the dam, and the flood of outrage that followed could no longer be contained. Britain was waking up to the reality of Starmer's double standards, and once awake, there was no going back. For years, politicians like Starmer had promised to restore law and order. They vowed to clean up the streets, to put an end to gangs, to protect the vulnerable. But what did the public see instead? They saw machete gangs ruling entire neighbourhoods with fear. They saw grooming scandals swept under the rug. They saw police officers refusing to step foot in no-go zones after dark. And then, in the middle of this chaos, they saw the full force of the law brought down not on predators, not on killers, but on a schoolgirl eating a burger after 5 p.m. The hypocrisy was staggering. Parents across Britain began to fear that their children were living under a system designed to crush them before they even had a chance to grow. Schools, supposedly safe places for learning, were turning into indoctrination centres where being openly British was treated as shameful. Police, once seen as protectors, now looked more like political enforcers. And Starmer? He stood above it all, detached, unbothered, hiding behind empty words. It was this disconnect, this chilling indifference, that gave Gervais his sharpest weapon. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" Gervais asked. "It's not just that they arrested a kid for a cheeseburger. It's that they think they can get away with it. They think we're too stupid, too scared, too beaten down to fight back. But we're not. We see it. We all see it now." His words resonated because they gave voice to the gnawing suspicion everyone already carried, that Britain was no longer the country they once knew. Protesters began framing the debate in stark, unforgiving terms. Was Britain still a free nation, or was it becoming something darker, an authoritarian playground where speaking out, or even living normally, could make you the next target? Gervais captured that fear perfectly. "If you can be arrested for a burger," he said, "what else can they arrest you for? Wearing the wrong shirt? Saying the wrong word? Laughing at the wrong joke? Where does it end?" His questions hit like hammers because nobody, least of all Starmer, could answer them. What stunned many was how quickly the incident spiralled into a broader cultural war. Parents weren't just worried about curfews anymore. They were worried about what their children were being taught in classrooms, about how their heritage was being erased, about whether they were being conditioned to accept silence and compliance. The story of one girl in McDonald's fused with the story of another girl, banned from Culture Day for wearing a Union Jack dress. Together, they painted a bleak picture of a Britain where the majority culture was sidelined, mocked, even punished. And still, Starmer's government insisted nothing was wrong. Ministers downplayed the outrage, calling it overblown. Police spokesmen parroted bureaucratic nonsense about procedure and policy. But every word only deepened the divide between the people and those who claimed to serve them. In the eyes of many, the government had revealed itself not as a protector, but as an oppressor. Gervais knew exactly how to frame it. "This isn't about one girl," he said. "This is about all of us. It's about whether we're free citizens or subjects of a system that's forgotten who it's meant to protect." The simplicity of that truth struck harder than any speech from Westminster ever could. Because Gervais wasn't talking like a politician. He was talking like a neighbour, like a friend, like a man furious for the same reasons everyone else was furious. The more he spoke, the more ordinary Britons felt emboldened. Parents began defying curfew rules, daring police to try again. Protesters carried Union Jacks in public, refusing to be shamed into silence. Online, Ricky Gervais's furious rants spread like wildfire, each clip exposing the absurdity of Starmer's two-tier system to millions around the world. What began as one arrest was becoming something far more dangerous for Starmer, a movement of outrage that he could not contain. By now, the Prime Minister's image as a calm, steady leader was in ruins. Every new headline about the arrested schoolgirl reminded people of his cowardice, his silence, and his hypocrisy. And every new word from Ricky Gervais reminded them of the truth. Britain was sliding into chaos, and the government was helping push it there. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a reckoning. And Starmer's name was now forever tied to the image of a handcuffed schoolgirl in McDonald's, a symbol of everything broken, unjust, and shameful in his Britain. Ricky Gervais unleashed his fury for the third time. The story had grown far bigger than a single girl, a single burger, or a single police squad. It had become the defining image of Starmer's Britain, an image of weakness disguised as strength, control dressed up as law, and injustice passed off as order. What started inside a McDonald's had now spilled onto Britain's streets, into its schools, and into the national conscience. It was no longer possible to look away. The symbolism was too sharp to ignore. A teenage girl humiliated, shackled, and dragged away like a criminal, while predators, violent gangs, and career offenders laughed freely in the shadows. That image burned into the minds of parents, teachers, workers, and even children. And when Ricky Gervais said, "If this is Britain, then Britain is broken," it struck harder than any headline, because it was not comedy, not satire. It was truth spoken without mercy. Starmer, of course, tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. He praised the police, doubled down on his public safety measures, and dismissed the outrage as overreaction. But it was too late. Every denial, every excuse, every smirk of indifference only widened the gulf between his government and the people. The arrest had stripped bare the rotten core of his promises. He had claimed to restore order. What he delivered was humiliation for children and protection for criminals. And Britain noticed. Families who had once ignored politics suddenly felt the iron hand of the system in their own lives. Parents who thought rules didn't matter saw their daughters punished for being too British, too outspoken, or simply too hungry. Workers who trusted the government began to ask whether they were the next ones to be silenced. Bit by bit, the fear that had once kept people quiet began to turn into defiance. This was Ricky Gervais's greatest contribution. He had no manifesto, no political party, no desire to sit in Parliament. But his voice mattered precisely because it was free of all that. He was not a politician. He was a man who saw the absurdity of the system and refused to let it pass. He reminded Britain that sometimes laughter is not enough, that when the joke becomes reality, rage is the only honest response. When comedians start sounding like the only sane voices in the room, he warned, you know your leaders have failed. The more he spoke, the more the people rallied. From protests outside McDonald's to students waving Union Jacks in defiance of their schools, from parents confronting police to workers exposing double standards on social media, a new energy began to stir. The arrest meant to intimidate had instead ignited resistance. A system built on fear was now facing a population that refused to be silent. Starmer's Britain had revealed its true face: authoritarian, selective, cowardly. But in doing so, it had awakened something more powerful, an anger that would not fade. Gervais had become its unlikely torchbearer, mocking the hypocrisy, tearing down the lies, and calling out the cowardice in language so simple that no one could twist it. He didn't need slogans, he didn't need spin. All he needed was the truth, and the courage to shout it when everyone else stayed quiet. In the end, the image of a schoolgirl in handcuffs did more damage to Keir Starmer than any political rival could have done. It exposed the lie of his leadership, the emptiness of his promises, and the cruelty of his system. And Ricky Gervais, a man who had built his career making the world laugh, became the one who forced Britain to finally stop laughing and start questioning everything. Because if this is what justice looks like under Starmer, then the question is no longer whether Britain is broken. The question is how long Britain can survive before it breaks completely.